Hi, it's Dr. Mandy Reese with Reese's Pieces Diabetes. Thank you for joining me to learn more about diabetes management and technology in bite-sized pieces. We're continuing our series on continuous glucose monitoring. Part 3 is interpreting the CGM data. It's great for a person with diabetes to have a continuous glucose monitor, but it's important for both the person with diabetes as well as the healthcare professional to be able to interpret the data from the CGM. At first, it may look like Greek, but there is a standardized reporting system called the Ambulatory Glucose Profile report that standardizes the data that we get from any continuous glucose monitoring report, I should say. So looking here at this particular document, it can be a little difficult to look at this all in one. So we'll actually break this down into smaller pieces, not to worry. So when you look at the top left of the report, what you're going to see is your time in ranges. I like to call this the red light zone. So just like if you're driving down the road and you're going through a red light, you have your red that tells you to stop. There's an alert, slow down. Yellow means, hey, let's slow down a little bit. Green means we're good. We're going to talk about what each of these colors mean when it comes to a continuous glucose monitor. Again, time and ranges. A color system similar to a red light. On the top right, you're going to find glucose statistics. So this is where you can find your glucose management indicator, your GMI, your average glucose. We'll talk more about those in just a few minutes. The middle portion is your ambulatory glucose profile. This gives you a general feel for the time period that the person wore the continuous glucose monitor. What were the trends based on the time of day? The bottom part of the report gives a snapshot day by day, so you can see what's happening in terms of the glucose trends each day. I really like this because you can look based on certain days of the week. Is there more likely to have highs and lows depending on the day of the week? Let's break it down. So time and ranges, my favorite part of the AGP report. So I always like to begin with the green zone, which is our target zone. That's the blood when the glucose is between 70 and 180. So is a person with diabetes always going to be in the green zone? No, it's simply not possible. Now, are there folks that get really close? Yeah. But when we think about the green zone, our goal is to be there at least 70% of the time. The next color portion we're going to look at is the red, which is low. Low is 69 to 55. Very low, which is considered a level 2 hypoglycemia, is less than 55. Level 1 hypoglycemia is 69 to 55. So low, we want to be there less than 4% of the time. Very low, less than 1% of the time, ideally. High, don't let that scare you or scare the person with diabetes. High just simply means 181 to 250. We want to be there less than 25% of the time. And very high, which is above 250, we want to be there less than 5% of the time. So again, it's not good or bad. It's very important when you're talking with that person with diabetes. It's not good or bad. It's information, it's feedback, and the person is going to start somewhere on their journey with diabetes. Glucose statistics, very helpful for knowing what's the average glucose. The glucose management indicator is analogous to an A1C, for the time period that the person wore the continuous glucose monitor in a percentage similar to an A1C. Glucose variability is how much the glucose is going up and down. Certainly, the smaller that number or percentage, the better. The goal is less than or equal to 36% of the time. And I should say the report for the ambulatory glucose profile report can actually be found at the International Diabetes Center. They have a website that breaks this down even more. The ambulatory glucose profile is particularly helpful for looking at what are the glucose trends based on time of day. So we can see for this person, and moving left to right, you begin at midnight and you go through the day. So for this particular person, we can see that they are having some low glucose values between 12 a.m. and about 8 a.m. And we can see that their overall sort of average or median value, which is reflected by the more dark line that you see beginning at midnight, it's in target range. It's going towards the high end of normal around 3 a.m., coming down, staying in normal range. And about 9 a.m., at that darkened line, you're going to see it's actually going up into the high range, which is 181 to 250. It's staying there until about 6 p.m., at which time that darkened line is going to the high range. And that is staying above 250 until about 9 p.m. And then it's starting to trend down. So ambulatory glucose profile really helpful for looking at trends based on the time of day. And this is for either the 10 or the 14-day period that the person wore the continuous glucose monitor. The daily glucose profile is helpful for identifying trends based on day of the week. So I remember a story. I was talking with an endocrinologist one time, and he was sharing that he had a person with diabetes that he was working with, that they were looking at the daily glucose profile report for this particular person that he had been working with. And every Thursday evening, his blood sugar went high or very high. And what was really interesting is that it turns out the reason his glucose was going high during that time is because he went bowling with his friends and his wife wasn't there. So his wife wasn't there to hold him accountable. So he had a little fun and had some extra goodies that he didn't normally have. And that's the reason his glucose was trending higher. On this particular individual, let's take a look at Saturdays. So Saturdays, what we'll see on the 4th and the 11th is we can see in the early morning hours that the glucose is trending low. It looks like a dark orange color, and it's staying low in the early morning hours. But around mid-morning, what we're noticing is the glucose starts to go high, and then on the 11th, it comes back down to normal range, then goes very high in the afternoon and the early evenings. On the 4th, a Saturday, while the glucose starts off low in the early morning hours, it goes up mid-morning to the high range, and it stays up, and it goes even higher in the afternoon and evenings. What's interesting about that, I'm in Georgia. I live in the South, where Saturday football is a big deal. So for this particular person, if they were a big football fan and they were tailgating or watching football, I would want to ask, hey, what's going on Saturdays? Are you having a special brunch? Do you ever forget your medications on Saturday? Are you maybe a little less active? I would want to know what's going on that particular day of the week. Now, for this person, if I go and I look to Tuesday, what I'll see again in the early morning hours on the 7th and the 14th, I see similar values. I see the glucose go up to high, but I start to see it come back down on Tuesday the 7th. But on Tuesday the 14th, I see it stay up, but then it comes down. So it looks like this person, maybe on the 7th and the 14th, maybe the eating habits are different. Maybe they're more physically active on Tuesday. So it creates great dialogue and discussion for that person with diabetes to help them problem solve in helping keep their glucose in range more often. Remember, it's not about guilt, it's not doing things right or wrong, but it's about healthy coping skills in living with diabetes. Now, one method for interpreting the CGM report is called the data method. So, what does that really mean? Data. D is for download the data. So, before you go in the room and you meet with the person with diabetes, go ahead and look at their data. In our clinic, we have a Dexcom Clarity and a Libre account. So before the patient comes into the clinic, we can go ahead and log into our clinic accounts and look at their Dexcom or their Libre reports, and we can look at those key metrics. We can also look at their time and ranges before they come in. We can look at their ambulatory glucose profile just to see what are the trends based on time of day. And so when you start to sit down with the person, I always like to start with just kind of talking about asking them first what have their observations been on the last 10 to 14 days, maybe even 3 months, if it's been 3 months since they've been in. Second, we're going to assess for safety. Safety first, right? And this means hypoglycemia. So we want to look to see, based on time of day and day of the week, and the percentage of time, are they at a level 1 hypoglycemia, which is 69 to 55, or a level 2 hypoglycemia, which is less than 55. Time and range, focus on the positive. We want more green, but we want to start with the green that we've got. Remember, green means in range. And so focus on what days where things tend to be more in range in terms of the glucose. What's the person doing on those days? And let's build from there. Areas to improve. This is where we could actually look and see hyperglycemia. So when the time of day and which days of the week, what are the contributing factors that are leading to the hypoglycemia? Is it lifestyle? Is it food? What is contributing to the hyperglycemia? Again, not to build guilt, but to help build healthy habits and recognize what's not going as well and how can we improve that. And then lastly, develop an action plan with that person with diabetes. Work together. Oftentimes it's medication, but it should also be lifestyle, whether it's physical activity, nutrition, all of those things are important. Working in primary care, as I do, I work with family medicine residents and family medicine attendings, and we need a simple stepwise approach to interpreting CGM data. So now let's break it down into 3 steps. Now, before we start to interpret the CGM data, we need to make sure we have enough data. We need about 70% of data captured for 2 to 3 weeks in order to really be able to make adjustments to treatment plans. So, and this is based on recommendations from the International Consensus on Time and Range. Step 1, what's the problem? This is where we could really look at our time and ranges and see what percentage of time are we in range, what percentage of time are we high or very high, and what percentage of time are we low or very low. Remember, with hypoglycemia, we'll always address that before hyperglycemia because hypoglycemia is a safety concern. So let's look at these metrics, and that will tell us whether it's hypo or hyper, and that's where we need to focus depending on where the person's at. Second, where is the problem? So we identified first, what is the problem? Is it hypo? Is it hyper? Next, we want to know where is the problem. This is really helpful in terms of time of day. So we look at the middle part of the report, the ambulatory glucose profile, that middle section, to look at what patterns. Is it a certain time of day that this is happening? So for this particular individual looking at this report, if I move to the right, and again, I'm looking for the darkened line to show me the median, I'm going to see that in general, I don't really see any darkened lines in the low range. So we're good with that. So what I want to address next is the hyperglycemia. So if I look at the 6 p.m. to about 9 p.m., a little bit after, I can see that this individual is in the very high range. So that's where I want to focus and say, okay, let's talk about what's happening from 6 to 9 p.m. Are we, what are our dietary choices? What are our physical activity? Are we taking our medication? Next, how do we adjust therapy? What I find particularly helpful here is that we can actually look and we can see what trends are we seeing based on the day of the week. Now, we're always going to address hypoglycemia first. In the last slide, when we looked at the ambulatory glucose profile, where we see that darkened line, where we see the median value in general wasn't low at any point in terms of the median. However, there were times a day where the person did go low some. So for this particular individual, what I'm going to want to talk about when I'm thinking about this is if I look basically at the 4th through the 7th, I see in the early morning hours, this person was actually going low. I see again on the 11th, on the 12th, on the 13th, and on the 14th, they were also going low. So I would want to talk to them about, okay, what's happening on these particular days that we think is contributing to the early morning hypoglycemia. Next, after we talk about that, I would want to talk about, okay, when we were looking at time of day, just in general with issues in terms of that median value, I was concerned about very high glucose between 6 and 9 p.m. So having discussions about medications, nutrition, physical activity, all of that is very, very important. So this is the end of the 3-step process for evaluating CGM data. This was simply an introduction to interpreting CGM data. More to come with some sample cases where you can figure out how to adjust a treatment plan for a person with diabetes based on an AGP report. Thanks for joining me in this bite-sized piece of learning. Please leave comments and feedback. Make sure to share and subscribe to Reese's Pieces Diabetes YouTube channel. Thanks so much.